"You sure you're in the right place, sweetheart?" The condescending voice cut through the air like a blade, sharper than any rifle report. The middle-aged white man behind the counter barely looked up from his paperwork as 38-year-old Sergeant Major Denise Washington stepped into precision point shooting range on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in suburban Virginia. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, a modest sweater, and comfortable sneakers. Nothing that would reveal the 20 years of military service etched into her disciplined posture. But they saw what they expected to see. A black woman who didn't belong. What they couldn't see was the sniper badge hidden beneath her sweater, earned through months of grueling training where she outshot every male candidate. They couldn't see the commendations for marksmanship that filled an entire drawer at home. They had no idea that the woman they were about to mock held the unofficial record for the longest confirmed kill shot by a female sniper in U.S. military history, a record she couldn't speak about due to classified operations. This is a story about assumptions and arrogance, about the dangerous intersection of racism and sexism that black women navigate daily. It's about how prejudice blinds us to excellence, and how the most extraordinary people among us often hide in plain sight. Most importantly, it's about what happens when ignorance meets expertise, when bigotry confronts brilliance. In the next hour, everything these men thought they knew about women, about black people, about who belongs in their world, would be shattered by 168 grains of lead traveling at 2,800 feet per second. But first, they would reveal just how deep their prejudices ran, and just how willing they were to humiliate someone they saw as beneath them. They had no idea they were about to learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. Denise Washington was born in 1985 in Detroit, Michigan, during the height of the crack epidemic that devastated urban communities across America. Her neighborhood was a war zone where gunshots were as common as car horns, where children learned to hit the floor at the first pop of gunfire. While other kids feared the sound of weapons, Denise became curious about them. Her grandfather, Samuel Washington, was a Korean War veteran who had served as a marksman in the 24th Infantry Regiment, one of the last segregated units in the U.S. Army. "Baby girl," he would tell her as they sat on the porch of their crumbling duplex, "a gun is just a tool. It's the person behind it that makes it good or evil." Samuel had returned from Korea to a country that still saw him as a second-class citizen despite his service. He worked 3 jobs to keep the family afloat, but on weekends he would take young Denise to the basement where he taught her to aim with a BB gun at tin cans lined up against the concrete wall. "Breathe in, breathe out, hold," he would whisper. "Feel your heartbeat fire between the beats." By age 12, Denise could hit a dime from 20 yards away with iron sights. By 14, she was out shooting Legion Post members 30 years her senior at weekend competitions. Samuel saw something in his granddaughter that reminded him of the best snipers he'd known in Korea. A natural stillness, an ability to control her breath and heartbeat, and most importantly, the mental discipline to remain calm under pressure. Growing up black and female in Detroit meant navigating a world where opportunities were scarce and prejudice was abundant. Denise excelled in school despite attending underfunded institutions where textbooks were decades old and classroom ceilings leaked. She watched friends fall victim to drugs, violence, and early pregnancies that ended their dreams before they truly began. The military represented something different, a chance to serve something larger than herself, while escaping the cycle of poverty that had trapped so many in her community. When she enlisted in the Army at 18, she entered an institution with a complex history regarding black women. During World War II, the 6888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, known as the 6888, had been the only all-black female unit deployed overseas. These 855 women faced segregation, racism, and sexism, while sorting millions of pieces of mail for homesick troops. They proved that black women could serve with distinction, but their heroism was largely forgotten by mainstream America. The modern military that Denise entered in 2003 was theoretically more inclusive, But the reality was far more complicated. As military scholars have documented, Black women in the armed forces face what researchers call intersectional discrimination. They are marginalized both as women in a male-dominated institution and as Black people in an organization where white officers still hold the vast majority of leadership positions. When Denise applied for sniper training in 2008, she was one of only 3 women in a class of 47 candidates. The training was designed to break even the strongest soldiers. Months of physical torture, sleep deprivation, and mental challenges that pushed candidates beyond their limits. The washout rate exceeded 70%, and instructors took particular pleasure in trying to eliminate female candidates. Women don't have the physical strength for long-range precision shooting, one instructor told the class on the first day. His eyes locked on Denise and the other 2 women. The recoil alone will knock you on your ass. What he didn't understand was that precision shooting isn't about strength. It's about technique, discipline, and mental fortitude. Women often make exceptional snipers because they rely on perfect form rather than trying to muscle through the shot. Denise not only survived sniper school, she excelled. She graduated second in her class, earned the coveted sniper tab, and was assigned to a special operations unit where her skills would be tested in the mountains of Afghanistan. Over 4 deployments, she would prove herself again and again, earning commendations and the respect of her male colleagues. But outside the military, in civilian spaces like shooting ranges and gun stores, she was still just another Black woman who didn't belong. The shooting range where our story unfolds was part of a culture that had never fully reckoned with its exclusionary practices, where Black women were still made to feel like outsiders in spaces dedicated to the very skills they had mastered in service to their country. Precision Point Shooting Range sat in a strip mall between a hardware store and a barbershop. Its facade, decorated with American flags and signs advertising premium indoor ranges and expert instruction. It was the kind of place that attracted a specific clientele, mostly white, mostly male, mostly convinced that they were part of some exclusive brotherhood of marksmen. The parking lot was filled with pickup trucks adorned with hunting stickers and political decals that left little doubt about the worldview of the typical customer. Denise had driven 20 minutes out of her way to find a range that offered precision rifle training. She was transitioning out of the military and considering a career in law enforcement, which meant maintaining her shooting skills. Her usual range near the base was closed for renovations, so she had Googled alternatives and found Precision Point. The online reviews were mixed, 5 stars for authentic American gun culture and 1 star for unwelcoming atmosphere. But it advertised 300-yard rifle lanes, which was what she needed. The moment she walked through the door, conversations stopped. 3 men stood behind the counter. Bobby Mitchell, the owner, a 50-something former police officer with a gut that hung over his belt, his son Jake, 25 and eager to prove himself, and Earl Stevens, a regular customer who spent more time at the range than at his actual job. They looked up from their discussion about weekend hunting plans and sized up the new arrival. With undisguised skepticism, "You sure you're in the right place, sweetheart?" Bobby's voice carried the patronizing tone that Black women know all too well, the suggestion that they've wandered into spaces where they don't belong. "The Pilates studio is next door if that's what you're looking for." Denise kept her expression neutral, a skill honed through 20 years of dealing with exactly this kind of ignorance. "I'd like to rent a lane for precision rifle practice. Please, I brought my own equipment." Jake snorted and exchanged glances with his father. "Precision rifle? You mean like hunting? My girlfriend tried that once, nearly broke her shoulder." The implication was clear. If women couldn't handle hunting rifles, they certainly couldn't handle precision shooting. "I'm familiar with proper shooting technique," Denise replied evenly. She gestured to the rifle case slung over her shoulder. "I'd like lane 7 if it's available." Earl Stevens leaned against the counter with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged in this environment. "Lady, no offense, but precision shooting isn't something you just pick up from watching YouTube videos. Takes years to develop the skills, the muscle memory, the mental discipline. He paused for effect. Maybe you'd be more comfortable with our ladies' basic pistol class. We teach proper stance, breathing techniques, all that beginner stuff. The condescension was so thick, it was almost comical. Here stood a woman who had trained Navy SEALs in advanced marksmanship techniques, who had logged more hours behind a precision rifle than all three men combined, and they were offering her beginner lessons. "Tell you what," Bobby said, warming to what he clearly thought was going to be entertaining. "We're having a little competition this afternoon. Some of the regulars, seeing who can put the tightest group at 300 yards. Winner takes $50 from each of the other shooters." He looked her up and down with undisguised amusement. "You're welcome to join if you think you can hang with the big boys." The other men chuckled. This was clearly a setup, a way to publicly humiliate this uppity black woman, who had the audacity to walk into their domain and claim expertise in their sport. They had no doubt about the outcome. She would embarrass herself. They would have a good laugh, and she would slink away with her tail between her legs. "What are the rules?" Denise asked. "Simple," Earl explained. 5 shots at 300 yards from prone position. Smallest group wins. We'll provide targets and scoring." He leaned forward conspiratorially. "Course, there's a buy-in. $50. You lose, you pay everyone in the competition. Hope you brought cash." Denise looked around the range. Word had spread quickly, and other customers had gathered to watch the show. She counted 8 men, all white, all wearing expressions that ranged from amused anticipation to outright hostility. She was being set up for public humiliation, and everyone knew it. "I'll need to see the rifle I'll be shooting," she said. Bobby laughed. "Oh no, princess, this is BYOG. Bring your own gun. Can't blame the equipment when you embarrass yourself." He gestured dismissively. "What you got in that case? Some little .22 your daddy bought you for Christmas?" Denise set her rifle case on the counter and opened it with practiced efficiency. Inside, nestled in custom foam, lay a Barrett MRAD, one of the most advanced precision rifles in the world. The weapon cost more than most of these men made in 6 months. Its every component precision engineered for accuracy at extreme distances. The sight of it shut everyone up for exactly 3 seconds. Then Jake recovered his composure. "Jesus, lady, you rob a gun store or something? That's a $50,000 rifle." "Compensation much?" Earl added, drawing nervous laughter from the crowd. Bigger the gun, smaller the... well, you know what they say. What they didn't know was that this particular rifle had been custom built for Denise by a master gunsmith who specialized in weapons for special operations. Every measurement had been taken to fit her specific body dimensions, every component selected for her shooting style. It wasn't compensation. It was a precision instrument calibrated to its user's exact specifications. "Rules are rules," Bobby announced to the gathering crowd. 5 shots, prone position, 300 yards. Smallest group wins the pot. He turned to Denise with a smirk. "Still interested, or you want to back out now? No shame in knowing your limitations." The crowd murmured their agreement. They were all in on the joke now, all complicit in what they assumed would be this woman's humiliation. Someone had even started taking side bets on whether she would hit the target at all. Denise reached into her wallet and pulled out $50. "I'm in." As she walked toward lane 7, she heard the whispered comments behind her. "This is gonna be good." $20 says she doesn't even hit paper. Should we call an ambulance? That rifle's gonna knock her flat on her ass. Probably doesn't even know which end the bullet comes out of. What none of them realized was that they were watching someone prepare for an execution, not of a person but of their prejudices, their assumptions, and their arrogance. They thought they were about to witness a humiliation. Instead, they were about to receive an education in excellence that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As Denise settled into prone position, the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder transported her back to Afghanistan, to the mountains where life and death decisions were measured in inches and split seconds. But here, in this sterile indoor range surrounded by hostile strangers, she felt the additional weight of history, the burden carried by every black woman who had dared to excel in spaces where she wasn't wanted. She thought about her great-grandmother, who had cleaned white families' houses during the day and studied nursing textbooks by candlelight at night, only to be denied admission to nursing school because of her race. She thought about the women of the 88th Postal Battalion who had faced segregation and sexism while serving their country overseas, then returned home to a nation that refused to acknowledge their contributions. She thought about Marcella Hayes, the first black woman to earn military pilot wings, who had endured decades of questions about whether she belonged in the cockpit. This moment wasn't just about proving her shooting skills. It was about confronting a system that had spent centuries telling black women they weren't smart enough, strong enough, or skilled enough to compete in spaces dominated by white men. Every comment about her rifle being too much gun for her echoed the broader societal message that black women should know their place and stay in it. Research has documented how black women in male-dominated fields face what scholars call intersectional discrimination. They must navigate both racial prejudice and gender bias simultaneously. In military contexts, studies show that black women report greater degrees of discrimination than white women, and often feel isolated from both their female colleagues and their racial peer group. The shooting sports community had been particularly resistant to diversification. Despite the growing number of black women gun owners, they represent the fastest-growing demographic of new gun purchasers. Many ranges and gun stores maintained cultures that were actively hostile to their participation. As one NAGA member described it, "You walk into some of these places and you can feel the temperature drop 10 degrees. The men surrounding Denise represented this old guard, gun owners who saw firearms culture as an exclusive club that validated their identity and status. For them, a black woman claiming expertise in their domain wasn't just unexpected, it was threatening. It challenged their sense of natural hierarchy, their belief that marksmanship was somehow tied to masculinity and whiteness. The psychological pressure was intentional and systematic. As Denise adjusted her shooting position, the comments continued. "Hope you got good insurance, lady. That scope's worth more than my truck. Bet she's one of those anti-gun liberals trying to prove a point. Probably learned everything she knows from Call of Duty." This was textbook intimidation, an attempt to get inside her head to make her second-guess herself, to create the mental chaos that would guarantee failure. It was the same tactic used against women in corporate boardrooms, against black students in predominantly white universities, against anyone who dared to challenge established hierarchies. But what these men didn't understand was that Denise had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Every dismissive teacher who had assumed she wasn't smart enough for advanced classes, every drill sergeant who had questioned whether women belonged in combat roles, every superior officer who had suggested she was only promoted to meet diversity quotas, they had all contributed to her mental armor. In Afghanistan, she had taken shots with Taliban fighters literally shooting back at her position. She had maintained steady aim while incoming mortars shook the ground beneath her. She had made life-or-death decisions, while her spotter whispered enemy movements in her ear. These suburban wannabe warriors had no idea what real pressure looked. As Denise began her breathing exercises, she reflected on the impossible position that high-achieving black women often found themselves in. Succeed too spectacularly, and you're accused of being an affirmative action hire or having unfair advantages. Fail to meet expectations, and your confirmation of racial stereotypes about black intelligence or capability. This paradox was particularly acute in military and law enforcement contexts. Black women officers reported having to work twice as hard to receive half the recognition, constantly proving and reproving their competence to colleagues who seemed surprised by their excellence. They were expected to be grateful for opportunities while simultaneously being made to feel like they didn't deserve them. The research was clear. Black women in law enforcement faced what one study called triple threat status, marginalized. For being black, for being women, and for being officers in communities where police were often viewed with suspicion, they had to navigate racial discrimination from white colleagues, gender discrimination from male colleagues, and community skepticism about their choice of profession. The key to survival in such environments was developing what psychologists called identity armor, a strong sense of self that couldn't be shaken by external negativity. For Denise, this armor had been forged through years of excellence in the face of adversity. She had learned to draw strength from the very hostility that was meant to defeat her. Every successful shot she had ever taken, every mission she had completed, every obstacle she had overcome became ammunition against the doubt these men were trying to plant in her mind. They saw a black woman out of her element. She saw herself as she truly was, a warrior who had earned her place through blood, sweat, and dedication. The ritual of preparing for the shot was almost meditative. Check wind conditions, minimal at indoor range. Verify range estimation, 300 yards confirmed. Calculate ballistic trajectory, routine calculation for someone who had made similar shots at twice the distance. Control breathing, as natural as heartbeat after thousands of hours of practice. As she settled behind the scope, the hostile voices faded into background noise. This was her element now, the place where prejudice and politics dissolved into the pure physics of projectile motion. Here, in the space between heartbeats, excellence spoke for itself. The men around her had no idea that they were about to witness something extraordinary. They thought they were watching a setup for failure. Instead, they were about to see what 20 years of military precision looked like when unleashed by someone who had spent her entire life proving that she belonged. The range fell silent except for the hum of ventilation fans and the distant sound of pistol fire from other lanes. Denise had completed her final equipment check, scope zeroed, bipod legs adjusted for the concrete floor, rifle secured in her shoulder pocket. She lay behind the Barrett MRAD like she had 1,000 times before, her body forming the perfect isosceles triangle that maximized stability and control. Through her scope, the target at 300 yards looked close enough to touch. She could see the grain of the paper, the precise lines of the scoring rings. For someone who had regularly engaged targets at 800 meters and beyond, this distance was practically point-blank range. "Shooter ready?" Bobby called out, his voice thick with anticipated amusement. "Ready," Denise responded without moving her eye from the scope. "Send it when ready." The first shot broke like glass, a perfect trigger pull that surprised even experienced shooters with its crisp release. The Barrett spoke with authority, its muzzle blast echoing through the indoor range like thunder. But something was wrong with the reaction. Instead of the expected feminine cry of pain or surprise from the recoil, there was only professional silence as Denise worked the bolt with practiced efficiency. Through the spotting scope, Earl Stevens stared at the target in disbelief. That's a dead center hit," he announced reluctantly. The murmurs from the crowd shifted tone slightly. Maybe she got lucky. Maybe the rifle was so expensive it did all the work for her. Maybe the first shot was a fluke. The second shot followed 12 seconds later. Another perfect break, another thunderous report, another smooth bolt manipulation. This time, multiple men rushed to the spotting scopes. "Jesus Christ," Jake whispered. "That's touching the first shot." Shot 3 punched through the same hole, widening it only fractionally. The crowd had gone completely silent now, their mockery replaced by growing anxiety. This wasn't what was supposed to happen. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. By the fourth shot, it was clear to everyone watching that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The woman they had dismissed as a wannabe, the black woman they had assumed couldn't handle a real rifle, was putting on a display of marksmanship that few of them had ever seen in person. "What's the measurement?" someone called out. Earl Stevens looked through the spotting scope with shaking hands. 4 shots, measuring less than quarter MOA. His voice was barely audible. That's under 3/4 of an inch at 300 yards. The fifth and final shot was pure artistry. Denise had found her rhythm now, her breathing synchronized with her heartbeat, her mind clear of all distraction. The rifle recoiled into her shoulder like an old friend returning home, and she knew before the bullet reached the target that it was perfect. "Group measurement?" Bobby asked, though his earlier swagger had evaporated completely. 5 shots, 0.23 MOA, Earl announced. That's That's under 7/10 of an inch. At 300 yards. The silence that followed was deafening. This wasn't just good shooting, this was world-class precision. This was the kind of accuracy that competitive shooters spent decades trying to achieve. This was shooting that belonged in record books, not in some suburban strip mall range. Denise stood up from the firing line and safed her rifle with the same calm efficiency she had shown throughout the competition. As she turned to face the crowd, she reached into her wallet and pulled out a small leather case. From it, she extracted her military identification card and set it on the counter. Sergeant Major Denise Washington, U.S. Army Special Operations Command. 20 years active duty, 16 as a designated marksman and sniper instructor. Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to prove herself through volume or aggression. I hold the currently classified record for longest confirmed sniper kill by a female operator in U.S. military history. She paused to let that information sink in. I've trained Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Marine Force Recon in advanced precision marksmanship. I've logged over $50,000 rounds in combat conditions across 4 deployments. I've made shots that saved American lives and eliminated threats to our national security. The men who had been so eager to humiliate her now couldn't meet her eyes. The suburban warriors who had questioned her competence were face to face with someone who had spent 2 decades perfecting the very skills they had assumed she didn't possess. Your little competition, she continued, picking up the 8 $50 bills that constituted her winnings. This was a warm-up exercise for me. I've made more difficult shots before breakfast on days when I was running on 2 hours of sleep. Bobby Mitchell, the range owner who had started this confrontation, finally found his voice. We had no idea. I mean, you didn't say you were military. I shouldn't have had to, Denise replied. My race and gender shouldn't determine your assumptions about my capabilities. Excellence doesn't have a color or a gender. Competence isn't the exclusive property of white men. The transformation in the room was palpable. The men who had been so certain of their superiority now faced the uncomfortable reality that they had just been schooled by someone they had reflexively dismissed. Their worldview, built on assumptions about who could excel in their domain, lay in ruins around them like brass casings on a firing line. Some looked ashamed, others looked angry, not at her, but at their own ignorance. A few looked like they were reassessing everything they thought they knew about race, gender, and ability. Denise packed her rifle with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout the competition. She had made her point with 168 grains of lead and decades of training. Now it was time to leave these men to contemplate what they had just witnessed and what it meant for everything they believed about themselves and their world. The lesson was over. Class dismissed. In the days following the shooting demonstration, Precision Point Shooting Range experienced something unprecedented in its 15-year history, an examination of conscience. Bobby Mitchell found himself unable to sleep, replaying the afternoon's events and confronting uncomfortable truths about his own biases. He had built his business on the premise that it served real Americans, a coded phrase that, he was beginning to realize, had excluded some of the most patriotic and skilled Americans of all. The story spread quickly through the local shooting community, though the details grew more dramatic with each telling. Some versions had Denise shooting expert-level scores while blindfolded. Others claimed she had been a secret government assassin. The truth was impressive enough, but truth often gets embellished when it challenges comfortable assumptions. Within a week, Bobby made a decision that surprised even his own family. He contacted Denise through her former unit's public affairs office and offered her a standing invitation to use his range free of charge. More significantly, he asked her to consider teaching precision shooting classes at Precision Point. Maybe, he told his wife that evening, it's time this place lived up to its name. Denise's demonstration had accomplished something that decades of sensitivity training and diversity workshops had failed to achieve. It had forced a group of men to confront their prejudices through irrefutable performance. As word spread, other shooting ranges in the area began reaching out to local Naga chapters and black gun ownership groups, recognizing that they had been missing out on a significant and growing market. The broader impact extended beyond the shooting sports community. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as part of the larger narrative about Black women's growing participation in activities traditionally dominated by white men. National organizations like the Service Women's Action Network and the Military Women's Memorial highlighted Denise's story as an example of how military women of color continue to face discrimination even after proving themselves in combat. For Denise, the incident at Precision Point crystallized something she had been feeling throughout her military career: the exhaustion of constantly having to prove herself to people who should have recognized her expertise from the beginning. But it also reminded her of the power she possessed. Not just the technical skills that made her an exceptional marksman, but the ability to change minds through demonstration rather than argumentation. She accepted Bobby's offer to teach at Utica, the range, but with conditions. The classes would be open to all skill levels and backgrounds. Marketing materials would explicitly welcome women and minorities, and a portion of the proceeds would go to supporting veterans' transition programs, particularly those serving women of color. Her first class drew an unexpected mix of students: suburban moms seeking self-defense skills, young Black professionals exploring shooting sports, and even some of the men who had witnessed her original demonstration. The atmosphere was respectful, focused, and completely different from the hostile environment she had encountered months earlier. "Shooting is about discipline and respect," she told her students during the first class. "Discipline in your practice, and respect for the weapon, the sport, and each other. When you master those two things, everything else is just mathematics." The incident at Precision Point became a case study in how individual acts of excellence can catalyze broader social change. Several shooting organizations began reviewing their cultures and practices, recognizing that their exclusionary attitudes were not only morally wrong, but also economically short-sighted. Black women represented the fastest-growing demographic in gun ownership, and ranges that welcomed them were seeing significant business growth. Military leadership also took notice. Denise's story was featured in Army leadership publications as an example of how unconscious bias continues to affect veterans' transition to civilian life. New programs were developed to help military women, particularly women of color, navigate civilian spaces where their expertise might not be immediately recognized or respected. 3 years later, Precision Point Shooting Range had become one of the most diverse shooting facilities in Virginia. Bobby Mitchell regularly spoke at industry conferences about the business benefits of inclusive practices, though he was honest about the fact that his conversion had been forced rather than voluntary. "I thought I knew what expertise looked like," he would tell audiences. "Turns out my definition was pretty narrow. When you judge people by their ability instead of their appearance, you discover talent you never knew existed." Denise continued teaching precision shooting while transitioning to a career in federal law enforcement. Her students, now numbering the hundreds, included police officers, military personnel, competitive shooters, and civilians from every demographic imaginable. Many credited her not just with improving their marksmanship, but with changing their perspectives on what excellence looked like. The 8 $50 bills from her original winnings were framed and hung in her home office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Excellence speaks every language, transcends every boundary, and ultimately cannot be denied, even by those who refuse to recognize it until it's literally staring them in the face through a rifle scope. The story of Denise Washington at Precision Point Shooting Range is about more than one woman's triumph over prejudice. It's about the millions of Black women who navigate spaces where they are underestimated, dismissed, and devalued based on assumptions that have nothing to do with their actual capabilities. It's about the cost of bias, not just to those who experience it, but to society as a whole when we fail to recognize and utilize the full spectrum of human talent. Every day, in boardrooms and classrooms, laboratories and courtrooms, Black women demonstrate excellence that challenges the narrow definitions of competence that still persist in many spaces. Like Denise, They often do so while carrying the additional burden of representing their entire race and gender, knowing that their success or failure will be interpreted as evidence of group capability rather than individual performance. The battle against racism and sexism isn't won through single demonstrations of excellence, no matter how spectacular. It requires sustained effort to change systems, cultures, and hearts. It requires white allies willing to examine their own biases and create more inclusive spaces. It requires institutions willing to value diversity, not as a moral obligation, but as a strategic advantage that brings different perspectives and skills to bear on complex challenges. Most importantly, it requires continued courage from women, like Denise, women willing to walk into hostile spaces to endure the microaggressions and outright discrimination, to prove their worth again and again until the world finally stops asking them to. The next time you encounter someone who doesn't fit your preconceptions about who belongs in a particular space, remember Denise Washington. Remember that excellence comes in every color and gender. Remember that your assumptions might be the only thing standing between you and learning from someone extraordinary. Challenge your biases, question your assumptions, and never underestimate the quiet woman in the corner. She might just be the most lethal person in the room, because true strength doesn't announce itself. It simply performs,